Quick intro for those who are unfamiliar. We are being joined by Walter Isaacson today. Super exciting. American author, journalist, professor, Twitter Twitter celebrity. I'll put that one out there. A bunch of other stuff, at least in our circles. And we're super excited to have him on. He's written some of our favorite books. Of course, Steve Jobs back in 2011. Good one on Kissinger in 1992. Leonardo da Vinci in 2017. And of course, the big one that's coming, which I believe you can find, linked inside of his bio, Elon Musk. Yeah, the link is up in there. It's his pinned tweet. You can it's available for pre-order. You can see that was posted about 14 hours ago. Really good stuff. We're going to be asking Walter a ton of questions about Elon Musk, Tesla, all things along those lines today. I have some prepared to get into it with, but Walter, I'd love to first turn over the floor to you first. If you want to give a brief minute or two about yourself, if there's anything I didn't cover, about what you've been super focused on in these last couple of weeks, and then we'll take it from there. I'm sure we are all prepared to pelt you with questions, so hopefully you are ready. Just make sure your mic's working, Walter. You may need to tap that unmute button. Yep.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And thank you for doing this. I'll mainly leave it to questions. I will say it's been about 3 years that I've been by his side, and I don't think any biographer has ever had more access to a subject, except for maybe Boswell with Dr. Johnson, than I've had with Musk. He's just been unbelievably transparent, and there's some pretty surprising things in the book because of it, I believe. And I started when we had a conversation about 3 years ago, and he was somebody doing electric vehicles and batteries and taking us into space, which I loved. Then, of course, it became an even richer book when he decided to buy Twitter. And it was a pretty interesting scene that last April when he just got it in his head that he wanted to also buy Twitter. Everybody thought it was going to fall to pieces, but here we are on Twitter Spaces, once again showing a lot of the innovation he's been able to do. With that, let me just leave it to questions. I don't mean to make this something where I'm monopolizing it.
Absolutely. Sounds good. I'm going to lead us off with a question. I'm going to give my co-host an opportunity to get some in, and then we'll make our way around the panel. First question that I have is Elon Musk is a bold presence, right? And he is known to make often controversial statements on social media, statements that drive a lot of attention. I would love to hear from your perspective. How do you think his presence on a platform like Twitter, especially over the past year, where he has made so many moves and you've been privy to them, has influenced his public image and the perception of the companies that he is building, and really how it's going to affect them in the coming years?
He doesn't think too much about what the impact will be. It's almost as if he has a compulsion to tweet. He's done it, I guess, for 11 years now, been very active on Twitter. Of course, in 2018, famously, he went off the rails a bit with the pedophile tweet about the cave diver and then the take private tweet. But he's always felt that it was a bit like a flamethrower, like the flamethrower he does for the Boring Company, but a flamethrower for the thumbs. And he quotes a line from Gladiator, "Are you not entertained? Are you not amused?" And I just think that when he had, at the beginning of 2022, about $10 billion burning a hole in his pocket because he had to exercise stock options, he asked, we were talking about it, what's the product I like most? And he said to himself, it's Twitter. So quietly from January until April, he began acquiring stock in Twitter and eventually decided that instead of being on the board, he wanted to own the place.
I love it. Appreciate that answer, Walter. And that is very much in line with the thought pattern that we've heard for many a time, which is this isn't new, right? He's been doing this for a long time, and it's kind of getting more and more recognized now than more than ever. Evan, let me turn it over to you to throw a question into the mix here.
I just have a really quick kind of piggyback off that one, and then another question. When did he first tell you that he was buying shares of Twitter? Was it kind of when he first did it? Was like kind of right before it went public? Was that something he was doing like very quietly on himself, or was he kind of talking about it more? I know he gave you a lot of access. So,
well, initially it was very quiet, but I was sitting there, especially in April, when he was about to open Gigafactory in Austin. And he was sitting on the mezzanine there, and Kimball, his brother, and Ken Howery, his friend, and Antonio Gracias, and many others were around. And he started talking about how he had a big stake in Twitter, and he became interested in either taking a board seat or even for a short period working with Kimball, using the blockchain to create an alternative to Twitter. He'd always, as I said, been compelled, almost addicted to the drama that comes with Twitter. Many of you know Antonio Gracias, who's been on the board of Tesla, probably one of Elon's closest friends. At one point, when Elon was firing off tweets without filtering them in the least, they were on a trip, and Antonio took took Elon's iPhone, and locked it in the hotel safe with Antonio punching in the code so that Elon couldn't get up at 3 a.m. and start tweeting again. But at about 3 a.m., Elon called hotel security and had him open the safe. So it's something he just loves almost to the point of compulsion.
I love that. And kind of on the drama aspect of it, I want to kind of start my first real question a little bit more lighthearted, we'll say, I guess. There's been a lot of talk recently about a cage match that may or may not be happening. I just wanted to get how much has Elon, through the time that you've been with him, does he train? Has it kind of is something that maybe started up over the last couple of months and years? And how does he eat that kind of personal fitness side of it?
Yeah, he does not do a lot of training in the house in Boca Chica. He's got one of those CrossFit, sort of training or exercise machines, but he doesn't use it often. As you know, he's very impulsive about these things. On one of his birthday parties, I think like his 30th birthday, Tallulah Riley, I think threw it, had a sumo wrestler because the whole concept was the Mikado. And Elon couldn't help himself. He decided to get into the ring with the sumo wrestler. He had been training a bit, and he tries to throw the sumo wrestler, which he does for a moment, but he dislocated or hurt a disc in his back and in his neck. And he's had at least 3 operations since then. I've been with him where he'll just lie on the floor of a conference room, on the floor with an ice pack behind his neck. So he's got sort of neck and back and disc problems. I think, Elon's always mercurial and hard to predict. I think all this talk about going to the Coliseum or Las Vegas for a cage match um, is a bit of a metaphor, pun intended, for his struggle with Meta and Zuckerberg. But I don't know that it's really going to happen in reality. As for his training, as you know, he's on the intermittent fasting diet, uses sometimes the diet drugs. But when I've seen him eat, when he has that one meal a day you're allowed to have, I remember sometimes once we went to the creamery in Palo Alto and he ordered a double bacon cheeseburger and a multiple ice cream type sundae or milkshake, I guess it was, and sweet potato French fries, which his son X helped him eat. So he's not in hyper training mode, I would say.
I love it, Walter. Let me bring this to Farzad in just a second, because Farzad, you have had obviously a ton going on with Elon, with Twitter. Your account went up like 10,000 followers in the past week. The haters are coming out of the woodwork, and I always love the insightful questions that you do have to bring over to Walter. I'd also say to the audience, I see so many of you retweeting the space, sharing it out. We appreciate the love. I'm sure that Walter appreciates the love. Stock Talk Weekly, I'll bring the mic to you in just a minute after Farzad. Apologies for that. And I just want to say, thank you to everyone that's coming in. We love making these happen. If any of you feel free to share it out, that would be great. But Farzad, let me bring it to you. See if you have a question to throw into the mixer. Then we'll bring it to Stock Talk Weekly.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having me on. Walter, thank you so much for making the time, man. Super appreciated. I've never had my phone locked into a safe, so that's I guess kudos to me.
Farzad, you should try it
I
out.
should.
Maybe we should all lock it in the safe at 3
I
a.m.
agree.
It's good talking to you, Farzad. I follow you quite a
Thanks,
bit.
brother. I really appreciate you. Yeah, you're somebody that I really admire. I love your work. I read your Steve Jobs book, and it was phenomenal. So I can't wait for the Elon Musk book to come out. The big thing from my end is, so I had worked at Tesla for a little over 4 years, 4.5 years ish, and I was very fortunate to be in multiple leadership positions. And the thing that was super like eye-opening to me is that the way that company is run, and if I can sort of draw a parallel with SpaceX and Elon's other ventures, it seems like the company's run as a startup with 100,000 people, and I don't know if that's a premeditated thing that Elon has done from a cultural perspective. So from my like, as I was looking at it, I'm like, man, so many people have autonomy, so many people are empowered to make decisions. And if I think about other companies that I've worked at, great companies, and all the other people that I talk to, it seems like the bigger a company gets, the less you're able to do. But like at Tesla, I felt like everybody was able to do so much. Could you maybe talk a little bit about how that culture is set? Is that a premeditated move from Elon's perspective? Any insight there would be awesome to hear.
That's true of Tesla. It's also true of SpaceX, which is he loves risk and he wants everybody to take risk, which is why he's being able to get things into orbit and to move us into the era of electric vehicles. He also believes very strongly in connecting designers and engineers with the manufacturing. It's a big difference from Steve Jobs. Steve used to love to walk around Johnny Ive's design studio and sort of feel the curve and chamfers of the iPhone. But once they got it totally designed, they just sent it off to China to be manufactured. And Jobs never visited the factories in China. But the thing that impressed me the most about Musk is he is always walking the factory line. There's so much in the book just about the feedback you get when you walk the line of the factory. And that gives you an iterative process where the design is geared to being manufactured. And that's what I think gives you a startup feel for it, is that you can be very nimble and flexible.
Got it. If I could do just maybe one quick follow-up, if it's okay. Uh, do you see him delegating a lot as well? Is that something that he's very good at? He's just, how willing is he to delegate a lot of those sort of minutia things, or is it something that he wants to take on? Maybe a little light there would be helpful.
He's hyper focused on the things he's interested in. If he's walking the line at Boca Chica, he'll be looking at how the Raptor engines are installed and talk for an hour or 2 hours with the team about heat shields and shrouds and what to do. But the other things that he's not hyper focused on at that point, he trusts and even demands that his people take risks and do things. So he's able to focus serially on so many different things each day, but still on the stuff he's not focused on. Gwen Shotwell, Mark Juncosa, others at SpaceX can do it. Likewise, Drew Baglino, Franz, others at Tesla are allowed to do their own thing. And for the moment, he's focused even on factory design, like for the next generation vehicle, how they're going to build the assembly lines, both in Austin and Mexico, and exactly what's going to happen on each station of the assembly line. But for other things that he's not particularly focused on, people like Drew and people like Lars and people like Franz are fully empowered and even empowered to push back on him at times.
Super helpful. I have 1,000 other questions, but I'm going to shut up and let the rest of the panel take over. Thank you, Walter. Really appreciate your time, man.
I love it, Farzad. Stock Talk, go for it.
Yeah, so Walter, I just want to ask you, two questions, but the first is just going to be something I want you to, I guess, kind of expound on, which you talked about earlier today on CNBC, which is, your thoughts on this Threads Twitter competitor that's dropping tomorrow. I know you mentioned, you saw this as potentially exacerbating the risk that we balkanize, as you put it, social media and create these polar networks where people of a certain affiliation or set of opinions are migrating, and that defeats Elon's purpose of wanting to create a network where you can share opinions. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about that and what you think the risks are with Threads launching tomorrow.
Yeah, Elon speaks very passionately about the need to have a civic space where all sides, all viewpoints can talk. And I think he felt a year ago or so, as he was looking at Twitter, that it leaned to the left. It was very progressive. It had a mindset that often suspended or censored certain viewpoints. And he put his thumb on the scale pretty strongly, as you can see, whenever he adds his exclamation points or says interesting or retweets something to try to rebalance Twitter. However, there are times I think when he is now frightened off the PBSs and the NPR types, which is a shame. I mean, I go to Twitter both to, I follow Fox News, I follow NPR. That's the whole point of Twitter. And if it becomes an echo chamber of certain type of people of a political persuasion or so, for them, it's not even as much fun for them because they don't have people to engage with. So I do hope he's able to encourage not only progressives to stay on Twitter, but also what I would call this thoughtful centrists, people like John Meacham, my friend, who used to be on Twitter a lot, but feel it's become too contentious. On the other hand, Elon loves the contention. He loves, sort of mixing it up with the fights. I think that the meta competition will cause him to focus on how do I retain as broad a possible a base of users, because his biggest fear is that if it does become an echo chamber for one type or a few types of ideology, it's not only bad for the platform, it's bad for American democracy. We've seen that happen in cable TV, for example, where the left goes one place, the right goes another. We see that in the blogosphere. We see that on the talk radio dial. I think his major motivating reason for having Twitter is that he feels he wants to help democracy and help our civilization thrive until we're able to become multiplanetary. And to do that, it really requires a place where real discourse can happen rather than an echo chamber of shouting.
Walter, so the second follow-up I want to ask you is kind of a piggyback on Farzad's second question, which I think you did a good job expanding on about Elon's delegation skills, if you will. But I want you to just dispel this once and for all, because I think that a lot of, it's kind of annoying for me to constantly see this narrative, but it seems like a lot of Elon haters, if you will, have perpetuated this narrative that he doesn't really understand engineering, that he, despite calling himself an engineer repetitively, doesn't play a fundamental role in engineering. You talked about him being hands-on. Do you think it's just his delegation ability, or do you think the accomplishments he's had really do require a fundamental understanding of engineering? And how have you observed that in his conversations with engineers internally at SpaceX and Tesla?
If people don't think he's a good engineer, they're crazy. I mean, that's total bullshit. Um, it, the book is filled with very specific examples, some of them very large, like deciding to use stainless steel for Starship. Others, very, very specific, where he has an intuitive feel for material properties ever since he was at the University of Pennsylvania and freezing the erasers of pencils and seeing how they cracked and bounced. He understands the physical properties of materials. He understands how manufacturing works. I don't think, and I'm not just blowing smoke about him here, because I don't think he has that intuitive feel, say, about human emotions, about advertising, which is why sometimes it's been a rocky road on Twitter. But I mean, I hope you'll read the book. As I say, I don't mind doing a couple of shameless plugs here. I'd love it if people would pre-order it on Amazon today, because it goes into real detail in the way nobody has about his uh, engineering feel more than anything else. And he may delegate some of the marketing, or he may delegate even some design things to Franz. But when it comes to knowing exactly how to build an assembly line or exactly what materials to use in a car or a rocket ship, that's all him.
Well, I thank you for dispelling that so directly, because yeah, I've always found that notion ridiculous as well. But obviously, you have a much more intimate view than any of us have had into his day-to-day operations. So I appreciate you clarifying that for any people that might be doubting his engineering talent.
Yeah. No, that's there. I mean, that was, if you ask me, people sometimes say, what's your biggest surprise? I'd say that he has a passion, an obsession for engineering, and not only engineering the product, but as he put it, engineering the machine that makes the machine. In other words, engineering the factory, something we've lost in America. You know, with all due respect to Steve Jobs, who was great at engineering a product or designing a product, when you allow it to be manufactured overseas, from the very beginning at Tesla, when they were doing the Roadster and the battery cells were being made in Japan and assembled into a pack in Thailand and then sent to England to Lotus to be put into the chassis of the car, he realized that you could not outsource things. And he, more than any other car maker, has radically insourced the engineering of the car.
Let me pop in here about your book, in fact, Walter. Now, this isn't a sponsored space or anything like that. We're just huge fans of Walter and the work that he does. But we did go ahead and we pinned that book to the top of this space. So, real easy. If anybody's in the audience and you want to read some fascinating material, it's pinned to the top of the space. You can just scroll up and find it there. Before I go over to the other hands, though, I do have to turn the floor over to Omar, who's up here with us, and see if you have any questions you want to throw in. Then we'll go and make our way through these hands.
Hey, yeah, great. Thanks so much for taking the time to do this, Walter. So, I mean,
Hey, Omar, man, I follow the, you know, your Homar's catalog religiously. Thanks, mate.
well, thank you. And I'm super excited to read your book. I've got it pre-ordered. So, I mean,
Thank you very much for that. I appreciate it.
yeah, this is a, pretty basic question, but I mean, you talked about your access to Elon, sitting side by side with him, sitting there late nights by his side. I mean, this is somebody who has really captured the attention of the public. I mean, so many of his companies are so transformative to the auto industry, to other industries. Everybody seems to be watching him so closely, but so few actually have been able to spend the time with him that you have. So, really, just what was it like shadowing him for the course of this book? And, were there any preconceived notions you had of him that you were sort of surprised by what he's like in real life? And then a second question that's more technical, the book's about 688 pages. And I just love listening to you because you have so many great stories, like the thing about locking his phone in the safe, just all these little stories you've had shadowing him for the book. So I imagine it must be so hard to figure out what goes in the book and what stays out of the book and how you arrive at that final length. Could you maybe talk a little bit about your process for all these stories, deciding, what fits between the covers?
Yeah, well, let me start with the first part of your question, which is the up close access he gave me. And I was, if you ask me what surprised me other than his great focus on engineering, the other thing surprised me was how much access he gave me. And I think he believes in radical transparency. I remember being in the hot box room on the 10th floor of Twitter headquarters when he was doing the Twitter files. And there was no need for him to do that except for his belief in being absolutely transparent. And there were times when he can get very dark. I mean, this is not a book that just has a sweetness and light thing, because he can be really mean at times. He can be tough on people at times. But he believes too that you, in some ways, you're being more empathetic when you actually care about the whole enterprise rather than befriending or being sweet to somebody in front of you. And I remember those days when he first walked into Twitter headquarters last October and saw the notions about psychological safety that they liked and mental health days. And he really rebelled against that because he believes strongly that discomfort can be a good thing and that a maniacal intensity has got to be the operating principle. So it's sometimes a rough ride being alongside him. As for what I left out of the book, you did mention it's more than 600 pages. I really tried to get both the very personal in there, because I think it's important to understand, his relationship with Claire Boucher and Siobhan Zillis and his family and even his children, his wrestling with his oldest child, who, the fact that she transitioned and became a Marxist, how it affected his politics, but also, even though that's going to interest a lot of readers, I wanted you to also walk alongside when they were building Starship or when he redesigned the Raptor engine radically, or when he decided exactly how to do the new battery cells. So I didn't want to skimp on the very up close engineering stuff and also, frankly, not skimp on the personal side of them as well. So it ends up being 600 pages, but all the chapters have titles. If you want to skip the Neuralink chapter or whatever, you can. But to me, it all weaves together at the end with a belief in artificial intelligence as being an important thing, whether it's in the cars or in uh, AI or Optimus the robot, the belief in making us multiplanetary, and the belief in moving us into a sustainable energy future.
Awesome. Thank you.
Great question there.
Thank you, Omar.
I'm super excited to actually have Penny 2X on the stage as well. Haven't had the chance to speak with them on one of our prior spaces, but I know that they're a big Elon fan and does follow the account. And I'd love to hear any question that you have for Walter, Penny. I see they unmuted, but I'm not hearing them. Do you hear them, Evan?
I cannot hear them.
Okay. We are not hearing you, Penny. You may have to drop down and just come back up on stage. Shouldn't be a problem. Let's go over to Herbert.
Thank you so much. Hey, Walter, thank you. I've spoken to you a few times now and really appreciate everything it's surreal that I get to talk to you because I've read.
But I thank you, Herbert, but I learned from Musk, you got to be transparent, you got to be open. And if I'm going to ask people to trust me on the book, I can't do anything but appear in places like this and try all of you who I've followed so long. So I'm trying to learn from him the transparency and openness.
You certainly do that. Thank you. I've read 6 of your books. And I actually did a YouTube show today because what is it? Last week it was Elon Musk's birthday, and July 1st was the 20-year celebration for Tesla itself. So I got 2 questions for you. One, as you look through all the milestones, the history of what Tesla's gone through, there's been obviously some very key moments where Tesla almost died and didn't survive. The famous Christmas Eve funding that he talks about that kept the company afloat, the Daimler investment that happened, obviously the production hell that Model 3 happened. So which of these key moments was he the most that he thought was really critical for the success of Tesla? And then on the other side, all the positive things, all the wonderful things as you go through these milestones, you see things that are just beginning. The supercharger, we launched 6 of them in California. The AI and Tesla bot announcements, these kind of things just seem to be happening, and then years later they turn out to be incredibly important. So which of these things that are really beautifully going to change the world, transform the world, is he the one most excited about?
Well, to start with your first question, there were 2 times that are incredibly dramatic in the book that it looked like things were going south. 2008, which you referenced, when they went almost bankrupt. He had trouble with one of his major funders who wouldn't sign on to another equity round. And at Christmas Eve, it looked like it was gone. And you have to remember that at that time, he had shot off 3 Falcon 1 rockets from Kwaj, all of which had exploded, and he thought SpaceX was going to go. So there's a dramatic scenes in the book where those two are interwoven, and people like Mark Jankosa say to him, hey, you can't have both. You got to pick one because one's going to go bankrupt, but you don't want to kill both of them. And Mark said, if you love SpaceX, just let Tesla go. And he said, I can't do that. It will be the final nail in the coffin of bringing us into the era of EVs. And likewise, he couldn't bear to let SpaceX go. So that's a very dramatic. He's with Tallulah, his either on again, off again wife at the time. In that 2008, she's holding his head while he throws up in the toilet late at night because, he projects sometimes an air of calm, but it goes right to his stomach. So that was a brutal period. Tallulah's parents even offered to mortgage their house to see if it would help, but he didn't accept that. Then the other time, of course, is Production Hell that you referenced in 2018. And one of the interesting scenes in the book about that is that decision to build a tent, a new production line under a temporary tent in Fremont, because all of the shorts were trying to destroy him, and they had perfect information that he could not get to 5,000 cars a week. And if he didn't, Tesla would go under. But they didn't realize that he could build within 2 weeks a tent and using the slope of the parking lot, create its own final assembly line and save Tesla at the end of 2018. As for what's going to be most exciting in the future, we've all talked about FSD. What's particularly interesting about FSD is how it ties into his other AI products and projects. For example, FSD has a lot of rules-based algorithms. You see you're making a left-hand turn, there's a bike lane, do this. But Tesla has one of the greatest data feeds from which to train AI in the world. And that's a billion frames, a day of camera footage or camera video from Tesla cars. And so when you use a human imitation AI to say, how did millions of good drivers, and he has the drivers, rated as if they're a 5-star Uber driver, how did they handle the same situation? So I think the most important thing is how all of the book ends not with Twitter, but it ends with AI for cars, AI for humans, and then, of course, Starship. And I think as you pull together Dojo, Optimus the robot, Neuralink, which is, I think, the most underrated of things he's doing, where the chip is now being implanted in the first human test subjects this year. And that is part of machine human interfaces, part of artificial intelligence. And of course, you add to that FSD, and you can see the outlines of not just some stupid chatbot, large language model, predictive generative AI, but real world AI that can navigate the world the way a human does.
Walter, was there a specific storyline that Elon insisted be part of the book, perhaps countering some important disinformation? The one I would think of would be Eberhard claiming and rewriting history, saying that Elon was not a founder of Tesla.
Nope, absolutely nothing. No precondition on the book. He doesn't get to read it before it's published. It's a totally independent book. And by the way, Martin Eberhard and Mark Topperding get their say in the book. Complicated origin tale, always fights about origin. Same with X.com and PayPal. But he's never asked to read it. He never asked for a narrative thread. He certainly told me his own feelings about what Eberhard says. But I talked to 250 people, including ex-wives, adversaries, and Martin Eberhard, because I want to give people the full and transparent picture. And I assume that's what he wants.
That's fascinating that you talked to Martin Eberhard. How does he
Of
feel
course.
about how Tesla's transformed the auto industry? Does he have mixed feelings about it, or?
No, I mean, he has he's just agonized that Musk has been so rough on him. And, he thinks he contributed more to the founding of Tesla than Musk will give him credit for. I untangle all of that in the book because I obviously talked to J.B. Straubel. I talked to, all the people there at the founding. But I think Martin Eberhard, just like a lot of people, John McNeil, people who were former presidents of Tesla, um, they can't, uh, do anything except for kind of marvel at how it's become the most valuable car company in the planet and led us into the era of electric vehicles.
Let me see if we can get Penny in here now. Hopefully your mic's working, and then after that we'll go to Warren. But go for it, Penny.
Hey, thanks for having me up. My entire connection gave out like right as you were introducing me last time. So I got the Penny 2X and then I missed everything you said after that. But it's a super pleasure to be up here, Walter. I am such a huge fan. The question that I wanted to get into was, just sort of like the gravity of being around Elon. I think, if I got to spend time around him, it would feel like I'm at the center of the universe. I'm curious if you have like withdrawals or, if you feel a sense of relief after that. And then, if you could follow that up with just speaking a bit about your feelings on the authenticity of Elon's missions and like how much is he really behind what he says and how important is that in his success? I'd love to hear you speak on that.
Well,
Thanks, Walter.
being around, and thanks for the art you do, Penny. Being around Elon is a very intense experience. And even though I've pretty much finished the book, I'm still in touch with him quite a bit and get to monitor his meetings that are virtual as well as see him. But it's not as if you feel you're at the center of the universe. I'm from New Orleans. You feel like you're at the center of a Cat 5 hurricane. And there's an intensity to it, a maniacal intensity. And there are times when I'm holding my breath, and there are times when I flinch because I've never been as successful as Elon. I've never sent rockets into orbit, partly because I'm a little bit softer and nicer, wear a velvet glove. And so you don't get a sense when you're with him that you're having party time. You get a sense that you're in the middle of a pretty wild storm. And now you're making me remember my age, which is I've kind of forgotten the second half of your question.
I'm sorry, the second half was just about the authenticity of his mission.
The authenticity of the missions. Look, from the very beginning, I said, why are you doing these things? And he said, and from college, from his early days, both at Penn and even, Queen's University, he wanted to bring us into the era of sustainable energy. And he wanted to make humans a multiplanetary species. And I'll be honest with you, the first, few months of hearing him with those mantras, I was thinking, this is a type of thing you say in pep talks to your team, or you say it in podcasts, but you can't really be driven by it. But I came to believe that he was truly driven by these missions. But the really amazing thing is that he figures out these missions, and only afterwards does he figure out the intermediate steps that will help finance the missions. In other words, he was doing the Falcon 1 and then the Falcon 9 before he realized or decided that if he put up, thousands of satellites into low Earth orbit, he could recreate a private internet. And if he could just get 2% of the communications business, that would be more than NASA's budget. Likewise, with Neuralink, he really did want to guard against the dangers of runaway AI. And so he made a link between our brains and our machines. But I was there as he's walking through the Neuralink offices and coming up with the idea that in the interim, you can use it to help paralyzed people use their limbs again. And that can be a business model. And of course, with Tesla, it started with the Roadster, and it'll eventually get to the next generation vehicle, which is in moving us to the era of sustainable energy, along with Tesla Power and the battery pack and the solar roof. He's able to make a business out of it. So I think he is. I mean, it's almost like he read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy once too often as a kid, because he is driven by this sense of mission.
Thank you so much. Honor to speak with you, Walter, and also honor to hear you appreciate my art. Thank you.
Yeah, it's good art, man.
Yeah, the art's fantastic, Penny, and that's where I've seen you from on the timeline, and I appreciate you making your way up into the spaces. I love it. Okay, let's bring in Warren. Appreciate the patience, Warren.
Oh, no, thank you. And thank you for joining us, Walter. I wanted to ask you about something you just mentioned, the mission and he has these crazy missions of, a million people on Mars, or, converting the whole world to sustainable energy, brain implants that let us communicate with the AI. It reminds me of Steve Jobs' reality distortion field. Can you compare the two? He's able to communicate these missions that sound crazy, and then people start to believe in it.
Yeah, they both have a reality distortion field. I don't think that Steve Jobs was driven by as high a sense of mission. He was driven by mission. I mean, I remember vividly the mission of having 1,000 songs in your pocket. Here's a guy who used to ride around with Woz when they were teenagers, getting bootleg tapes of John Lennon and of Bob Dylan. And so music becomes a passion, and that's why he moves out of just the computer business to do the iPod. But there's a different order of magnitude when you're trying to get humanity to Mars.
So I wanted to follow up on that. You hear these missions. I admit I'm a true believer. After all this time with him, have you become a true believer in all these missions, or do some of them seem more improbable than others? Or do you think they're all going to happen?
Well, they're all going to happen, as he says himself. Sometimes he gets, he turns things from being impossible to just being very late. So it's a question of time. I think Starship will launch again probably late August or September. And then it may take 2 or 3 launches, just as it did with Falcon 1, whatever this is, 15 years ago. But eventually he's going to have Starship launch. And eventually it will get humanity to Mars. Will it be in my lifetime or his? Probably. And as for the other one that I find more improbable than he does, but 100% full self-drive, level 5, or, a pure autonomy, it gets closer and it gets closer. So, and he's already proven that he can move us into the era of electric vehicles. I mean, 5 years from now, somebody buying a gasoline-powered car will just seem like somebody buying a horse and buggy. It's just not going to happen. So sometimes he's definitely late, but he makes the missions happen.
Thank you.
Great question. Before I bring in John here, I just want to give one more big shout out to Walter, who's up here with us. If you're in the audience and you haven't already taken the opportunity to go ahead and follow his account, now is a great time to do it. He's probably going to break about 250,000 followers today or tomorrow. Definitely make sure that if you haven't yet, you are pre-ordering the book. You can find it pinned in the top of this space. It is the only pinned tweet in the top of this space. You can also find it on Walter's account. It is his pinned tweet. And a big thank you to just the amazing speakers that are up here across the board. We have so many people that are involved with Tesla, Twitter, Elon, tech, AI, and so many other great topics. They come on spaces with us every single week, take hours of their time to share for free with the audience. Reminder, this is an unsponsored space. Nobody's being paid to be here. We're all here because we enjoy having these conversations. And it's super exciting to see thousands of people tune in live to them and to follow these accounts. And that's all that we ask. Follow the speakers. It does go a long way. And to a lot of these people, it really does help supplement their lifestyles as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our very own John, who's behind the Tesla Owner Silicon Valley account.
Thanks for having me. And Walter, thanks for joining the space. I have two questions.
Wait,
How
I got to
does
know, are you in a self-driving car at the moment? Or are you talking while you're driving?
I'm actually by the beach right now, but
Okay.
I did take FSD to the beach, so it did fairly well. But so I have two questions. As you've been around some amazing entrepreneurs, leaders like Steve Jobs and obviously Elon himself, two questions. How does Elon prioritize, right? Obviously, I know it sounds like he picks stuff that he's interested, but I think when stuff is obviously going potentially wrong, like how does he prioritize? And then two, how does he pick leaders?
Yeah.
Thanks again for having me on. And Walter, it's a pleasure to meet you.
Yeah. He, as I say, focuses serially. So I remember being with him when he was doing a surge at Starbase, and he decided he had to have Starship stacked within 10 days. And then once that was done, and boy, there was a lot of pain and suffering and people flying into Boca Chica to do it. I remember climbing onto a roof, and all this is in the book, uh, where Brian Dow and the Solar Roof team are trying to install roofs. And Elon's there on top of the roof at 10 p.m. and 99 degrees in Boca Chica, and he's doing a surge on solar roofs. So he prioritizes in a systematic with 3 or 4 priorities on any given day. And he does it as a surge where he's just going to push it as if the accelerator all the way to the floor. And for example, during those periods, they might be Optimus the robot design meetings, and he'll skip those. He'll just miss them. But I think he told me one point it was like Napoleon on the battlefield. Even if he wasn't fighting the battle, wherever Napoleon showed up, his armies would do better just because he was there. And so sometimes it's really to incent the team and to extrude the shit out of the system by doing a surge.
Great. If that answers the question, I'm going to keep it rolling over here. We're going to go to Jeff, then we'll make our way to Farzad.
Hey, Walter. Thanks for spending time in the space. I pre-ordered the book. Thanks for, pulling all these.
Thank you for doing that, Jeff. I appreciate y'all pre-ordering it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it. I want to make a comment on the whole kind of manufacturing prowess of Elon. And as I followed him and watched him, and I've got a 2-decade history in kind of leading supply chain and some pretty big product cycles in the past, including kind of the modern smartphone, mostly on the Android side. And as I watch and I listen to him, and I've talked to many members of his team as well over the years, there is more of a comment. I have a question, but he is actually the real deal when it comes to a CEO that understands the technical side of how to design a supply chain from end to end, from the supply base and like what you build, what basically what you build internally, and what you put on the outside, and also like how that factory should actually be designed for kind of maximizing efficiency and growth. And again, this is my field and expertise. And again, not, he's incredible. I've never worked with a CEO, and I've worked with many of the biggest CEOs out there, and I've never worked with somebody who has that kind of expertise and actually a passion for it. So I'm just kind of echoing some of the things that you were saying, and I've never seen it before, and I think it's actually a massive distinguishing factor for Tesla and for him in all of his endeavors.
Yeah, and I'm going to use that to go back. I think it was Herman asked me, how does he pick leaders? Because that's part of what you just said. And he almost has a neural network in which he can intuitively pick the right leaders. And he does it through something called sometimes skip level meetings, which is if there's something really important happening, instead of asking his direct reports to tell him about it, he skips down a level to the people who report to his direct reports. And then he can be really tough and brutal. I mean, I spent time watching him ream out, say, the finance guy who was doing some of the rocket engines. But he figures out just by questioning him who's going to do well. And one of the people in my book, I'll just pick one of scores of people, is Jake McKenzie. Some of you may have heard of him. He's shy, quiet, dreadlocked kid from, the Caribbean, but who put himself through college and ended up at MIT. And Musk, during skip level meetings, saw that everything he did worked. And suddenly he's in charge of propulsion at SpaceX. And I've seen him do that too at Tesla. And for that matter, with his cousins, James and Andrew, and one other friend, I called them the Three Musketeers in the book, put everybody at Twitter through the ringer to see which engineers were actually good. So that's one of the things that his neural network does well. During COVID, when people were wearing masks, he said it knocked about 20% of his ability out of his neural network because it was harder to see people's faces when he asked them questions. But even then, he was promoting people, younger people, who ended up being able to push back on him at times, but also be great engineers.
Yeah,
Also,
he
I mean,
seems to
let
have
me
a
just
great
so
bullshit detector.
yeah, I mean, let me just say something about Twitter. I remember, I guess it was maybe April 17th, a Monday. We were down in Boca Chica and launching Starship, and at T minus 14 seconds, they abort the countdown, valve issue, and Musk flies to Miami, where he has to do an ad sales conference. And he said, I don't know why I even agreed to it, but Antonio and him, they go there. And on stage, he's being interviewed by Linda Yaccarino. They had never met in person before. But afterwards, they keep talking. And even though Starship was scheduled to be launched, the next morning after this thing, he went and had dinner with her and other people. And by the end of that evening, he's decided she's the right person to be CEO of Twitter. Now, that shows his understanding that he didn't need another engineer. He needed somebody with the emotional EQ that could handle advertisers and personnel issues. And within 2.5 weeks, he had struck a deal with Linda, a great ad executive at NBC Universal. But his neural network sitting in Miami said, here's the person who can do it.
Evan, you want to pop in before we go to Farzad?
I don't need to jump in line as far as that. I got a quick question, so we'll go to Farzad while coming out there.
Sounds good. For Farzad.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, so here you talk, Walter, and listen to your previous space as well. I mean, you're giving really good insight into how Elon Musk approaches problem solving, leadership, how to identify the right problems. And one thing I always think about is, SpaceX, Twitter, Tesla all have really huge missions that are tied to them, which you've talked about this, how these are very crucial in getting the workforce motivated and inspired to work as hard as possible. But I'm also curious, with the amount of time you've spent with them and the research you've done in other game-changing leaders throughout history, do you think the Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, whatever you want to call it, the Musk Corp umbrella of success, is that a uniquely Elon Musk thing that is a result of his life experience and what he's experienced and his brain and how he approaches companies? Or do you think this is something that's replicable if somebody reads your book once it comes out, so that there's a blueprint on how to approach company building like an Elon Musk? I'd love to hear your thoughts around that.
Well, I'd love you to buy the book, but
Pre-ordered already.
I'm not going to. Yeah, I'm not. Then you can reject it if you want, because I'm going to be honest. Biographies are not how-to manuals. I don't write, and I don't read the 7 secrets to being a good manager or the 12 effective rules for being a leader. I think biographies are about real people. And just as it was with Steve Jobs, you don't want to just imitate somebody, but you want to learn the lessons. So in the book, there's the manufacturing lessons, the famous algorithm and how he came up with that of question every requirement, something Boeing still hasn't figured out yet. Even there's a section on the lessons he learned from playing Polytopia, which he was as almost addicted to as he was to Twitter. So there are a lot of management techniques and secrets in the book, but I don't sort of say, here's how you can be like Elon, because with all due respect, you're not going to be, nor am I.
Right. And so I guess from a personal, like, if I can get your personal opinion, do you think the successes of the companies are directly tied to who he is as a person, or do you think there could be a different person that can lead a space, that's lead us Tesla? I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Well, you know, you can say that it isn't due to him that, say, Tesla did so well. But Tesla became the most valuable car company on the earth and transformed the way we do transportation. And then you could say that, well, maybe SpaceX. But SpaceX, even as it was about to go bankrupt in 2008, is now the only entity getting American astronauts into orbit in the space station. Even NASA can't do it, even Boeing. And then you go to Neuralink, and then you go to Optimus the robot, and you go all the way down the list. And it can't just be happenstance that these companies are successful. It's due to Elon Musk. And even great driven leaders like Jeff Bezos have not been able to get people into orbit. So the theme of the book is, well, you think maybe he was just lucky, or maybe it wasn't because of him. But over and over again, when the same formula works in so many different industries, and we'll see if he can make Twitter work as well, then that's when I start saying, here is the formulas he uses for his success.
That's great. Thank you, Walter.
Hey, Walter, I want to be respectful of your time real quick. So I know we're at an hour. Do you have some more time to spend with us? We obviously have a lot of
Sure, sure. I mean, it's a long book and there are a lot of questions,
Perfect.
and I want to be like Elon. Elon never, ever cuts off a meeting. And I'll be on 4 or 5 meetings a day with him sometimes. And I'm thinking, man, this has gone on 90 minutes. It's almost 2 hours, and he's still asking questions. So I think you got to be, if you're going to be like Elon, you got to be transparent, but you also have to be willing to put in the time. So thanks.
All right, you heard it here first. 24-hour interview starting 1 hour ago, right here. Yeah, definitely messing around. But I wanted to kind of keep a lighthearted question in here. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page here. Can you confirm that you did not see any aliens while you were following Elon Musk?
Not only did I not see aliens, he loves, the what is it, Fermi's paradox, which is how come we're all alone? How come we haven't heard from the aliens? And he truly believes that human consciousness is something special, that we don't know that it exists anywhere else in the cosmos. And even when it comes to AI, he believes that there's something about human consciousness that'll never be replicated by machines. So I know it's a lighthearted question, but Musk thinks about it sometimes. And nope, no aliens.
I have a follow-up question on that. There's a lot of answers to this, but what's the obsession with Mars from your perspective?
I have in the book where he discusses it at length, and there are really three things. One is he believes that human consciousness, as I just said, is this fragile candle, and it could be snuffed out. It could be snuffed out if something happens to our planet, if an asteroid strikes, or if we screw up the planet, or if democracies and civilization go haywire. And so you need a plan B to keep human consciousness in the cosmos, and that we have a small window, maybe 50 to 100 years, in which we're pretty sure civilization will be able to survive on this planet for another 100 years. But after that, we're not absolutely positive, and we might as well be another, spread human consciousness. Secondly, he believes, he was shocked to know that progress is not inevitable. When he was driving on the Long Island Expressway 20 years ago and wondering about NASA's plans to go to Mars, and he said, they had gone to the moon. It's now been 50 years since they've done that. Surely they have a plan to go to Mars. And yet there wasn't. That progress only happens if people put their thumb on the arc of history. And third, like Bezos, he believes it's the greatest of all adventures. His parents, his grandparents were all adventurers. They were all stunt pilots. They had Balloon jets, airplanes. They loved risk and flying into the Kalahari Desert. And he believes that America was settled by people who took risks and had a spirit of adventure. And now we've lost the ability to take risks, and we've lost that spirit of adventure. And the greatest adventure of all in his mind is becoming a spacefaring civilization. So those are the three main reasons.
Perfect. Appreciate that. All right. See a bunch of hands up. Let's go over to Omar first.
So you talked a lot about AI, and I think it's a really fascinating topic in the book. Elon seems to have kind of a complicated relationship with AI. On one hand, he's been talking for years about the risks of AI, that it could potentially end humanity. But on the other hand, he's developing things like full self-driving, the Optimus robot, Neuralink, that are really bringing these products into the forefront. With OpenAI, obviously, he helped found it and parted ways with them.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see his relationship with AI, and do you think he has any regrets, even outside of AI, and how those have really formed his thinking about this?
Yeah, I spent some time with Demis Hassabis, who you all know, the founder of DeepMind, who early on met Elon Musk at one of Peter Thiel's investment conferences. And Musk was talking about the existential threats to humanity. As I said, everything from asteroids to nuclear wars. And Demis said, add another to your list, untethered AI that reaches a singularity and develops a mind of its own and runs amok. And Musk processed this, as he does, by just going silent for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, and then realized that this was an existential risk. And the best way to combat it, he thought, was first of all to have an open source and open AI system where there'd be multiple AIs. And that's why he invests and helps start with Sam Altman, OpenAI. Now they have a big falling out, and OpenAI isn't quite so open, which is why Elon has started XAI. But likewise, he believes that another path to AI safety is having a close link between humans and machines. The whole digital revolution is about improvements in human computer interfaces, starting with JCR Licklider and the graphical displays to Xerox PARC and Steve Jobs with those user interfaces, and then Siri and voice commands. But the ultimate tethering of humans to machines would be chips in our brain that instantly are able to transfer information back and forth to the machines. So that's why he's doing Neuralink. He also believes that chatbots and large language models are just a minor step. What really matters is real world AI. He said people think he's behind OpenAI in creating new artificial intelligence systems. He says OpenAI has done large language models. Tesla has done how cars can drive in the real world. He says, which one is harder? Navigating the real world is an order of magnitude harder. And so he thinks that by combining generative large language model AI with the type of real world AI that Optimus the robot and FSD are doing is the holy grail.
Beautiful. Okay, John, I know you had a second question, so I'm going to come back to you, and then we'll hit Brian. Go for it, John.
Yeah, so I think you talked a little bit about his meeting with Linda. How does Elon evaluate leaders, and how does he pick them? Thanks for
It's very intuitive. You know, he doesn't have a checklist he goes through. And interviews, one thing I learned early on in just being by his side is don't fill the silences. He goes silent for a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Imagine how unnerving that is if you're somebody, especially in a job interview. But as Siobhan Zillis, who runs Neuralink and is the mother of a couple of his children, says, it's when he's batch processing. It's when he's sequentially taking in all of the inputs and batch processing it. And so he does that with people as well. I watched, he did it with Linda Yaccarino. He does it with Jake McKenzie. He does it with the people that he's promoted. And sometimes it's not a pretty sight. I've seen him do it. The names are in the book. I won't embarrass them by putting them on podcast, where his neural network says this guy is bullshitting me. And boy, that ain't a pretty sight.
Yeah, that seems to really be one of his core skills, the ability to quickly and naturally pick out who really knows their stuff and who's full of shit.
Yeah, I think he may have that skill a little too much. It maybe is he's too clever by half there, because I've seen him at times leap to conclusions and really be tough on somebody who actually didn't deserve it. But the interesting thing, and I'll take Andy Krabs, somebody from SpaceX, as an example. I saw him during one of the Starship surges. I saw Musk just really cut the guy into shreds. And yet, Andy was able to cope with it, repeated back all the things he said. And Musk said, I get it. He takes feedback. It's a good iterative process. And a few weeks later, the guy was promoted. It reminds me of Steve Jobs, who also used to be brutal on some people. And in the early days of the Macintosh team, they had an annual award they gave to the person who best stood up to Steve Jobs. And it was secret. They didn't let Jobs know about it, but he eventually found out about it. One interesting thing is the first 3 years, the award is won by women. Andy Cunningham, I think it was Joanna Hoffman. And the other interesting thing is Deb Coleman won it. All of them got promoted. And so I watch when people are able to endure his demon mode and they come out of it learning something from it. I watch how he then has a new respect for them.
That's fascinating to hear about the inside of these interviews and meetings. I really love it. Excited to see Brian joining us up on stage as well, someone who interacts with Elon plenty. Brian, do you have any thoughts or questions you want to throw at Walter here?
Yeah, yeah. Nice speaking to you, Walter. I'm a big fan of some of your work. So I guess my question would be, what do you see? And I apologize if this was already asked. I came in a little bit late, but what do you see as Elon's intentions regarding his Twitter purchase? Do you think it's primarily about free speech, like he said, or is it maybe something else, like controlling the data that Twitter has in perhaps creating his own AI himself? Do you think it's about
That's a
money?
really good question. One of the things about being intuitive and having a neural net is sometimes you're also impulsive. And the Twitter thing, it's a really wild ride. He's at Larry Ellison's house in Hawaii with one of his girlfriends in April of last year. And it's almost impulsive. He decides he's got to buy it, even though Kimball is trying to talk him out of it. Other people are too. And I don't think it it was partly he said, oh, I've got to make sure that democracy survives by having a common ground. I don't think it was that. I think he just loved it. He was bullied as a kid on the playground. The book begins with him being pushed down the concrete steps and his face being bloodied in the hospital for a week. And then his father doesn't even support him. You know, his father berates him afterwards. And he learned how to navigate that playground in which he was bullied. Well, the ultimate playground is Twitter. And he got to be king of the playground. And I think he wanted that. And he also just felt it was just a place that suited his personality. Now, you asked a really good question about the data feed. If you look at large language models and what they're being trained on, billions of documents from the internet, and they start hallucinating because, you know, they're reading Colleen Hoover romance novels as well as reading scientific journals. And so the models are only as good as the data set they train on. And also, if you use GPT-4 even, it's not really up to date. You can't say, you know, who do you think's doing well in the Republican primary field? What is the best source of up to the minute information? It's the billion tweets a day that are the hive mind of humanity that tell you every new piece of lingo, the different opinions people have. This is a huge gusher of, just as oil is the fuel for the industrial and revolution, this Twitter data feed is a gusher of real time hive mind information upon which AI can be trained. I asked him about this. I mean, did you think about that when you were buying Twitter? He said, no, it was kind of serendipity. Just as we were beginning to close it last October, it occurred to me that this gusher of information is huge for AI. So even last October, probably 10 days after he closes it, I'm in late night meetings on the 10th floor of Twitter headquarters. And that's when he's saying, cut off the API for a moment. Don't let the API be something that Google and Microsoft use to suck up all the information on Twitter. First of all, we're going to charge for it. And secondly, we're going to not let people train on our data. And as you know, there was a whole knicker twisting, hand wringing episode this past weekend when he limited the amount of tweets, especially unverified, users could use. Well, that's because Google and OpenAI are vacuuming up this data feed and using it to train AI. That's what Meta will be doing tomorrow when it launches its thing. And he did not want other companies, especially competing big companies like Google and Microsoft, to be sucking up this trove, this billion tweet trove of real time data. And so he was trying to find a way to stop that, totally understandably.
Great points. All right, let's go back to Penny over here.
Hey, thanks for letting me back up again. You mentioned the schoolyard bullying, and I think this whole talk has been, when we talk about Elon, most people in this room get really inspired, but he's really polarizing too. And even just as a fan of Elon, I get peppered with people who dislike him in my comments section. I can only imagine the heat that he gets. So I'm curious, like, how does he respond to the heat? Do you think that books like yours will help, bring some light to what he's bringing to the world? Do you think he'll always be so polarizing? Where does this go, Walter? Like,
I think
I'd love to hear you talk about that.
he's naturally polarizing, and I can feel it because I'm sort of the opposite. I mean, I go getting, agonized when people are being vicious and, making comments about things I've done. But he relishes it. He learned pain as a young kid growing up in South Africa. He learned how to navigate it. And in some ways, he was born for the storm. And he just likes the drama, likes the risk, and even likes barreling through the pain, whether it was being bullied as a kid or stirring up shit as a grown up. I do think, for my book, for better or worse, About a third of the people out there are unmitigated fanboys, and they'll probably find things in the book that'll piss them off a bit. A third of the people out there are true haters of Elon, and they'll find a few things in the book that, they'll find a lot in the book that they don't like. I think, though, that I hope that even his biggest fanboys or even his biggest haters will come away from the book, especially after the last few chapters, and especially after the opening chapter of what it was like in his childhood in South Africa and the lessons he learned from that, and what Grimes and Tallulah and Justine all say about the late night horrors he went through and how it brings him back to his childhood. I think people will say it's more complicated. And here's the really interesting thing I'll see. He's a very self aware person and he's very secure. He doesn't care when people attack him. It can be thin skinned at times when he thinks it's unfair, but still, he's very self aware. I'll be interested in how he reacts to the book because he was so transparent. And I'm going to say something slightly egotistical. I think he might even learn things about himself from the book, not just my insights, but his wives, his girlfriends, his adversaries, his colleagues, the insights they have about him. And so I'll be interested in the self awareness that comes from him when he reads the book.
I'm like so excited to see his reaction as well. I suspect that, like you
We
said,
should
he's
come on. We
self-aware.
should promise to come on this Spaces. We'll probably do a Spaces together, but I want to interview him about what it's like, to be so transparent and have a book done.
Oh my gosh, I can't wait for that. I have one more question, Walter. Uh, I think we've all thought a lot recently about like upcoming AGI and what life will be like after AGI. I think someone as driven as Elon, may have his life change more than anyone else. Did you get a chance to like sit with him and understand what he thinks, the post AGI world will be like and what his place and life would be like in that world?
I think that there are two paths that an AGI world can take. One is the singularity path, where an artificial general intelligence, the robots, the minds, leave us behind. They start learning on their own. They reach the singularity that Werner Ving and so many other people wrote about. And that frightens him. I think he believes that we have a shot of a safe AGI in which artificial general intelligence remains tethered to human agency and human will and even human values. But that doesn't happen on its own. You could imagine the creation of an AGI that just becomes unhinged, like Dr. Frankenstein's monster. And so that's what's driving him is a sense of AGI safety that comes from having AI always linked to human agency.
Thanks, Maddie, and others. Right, Warren, bring it back to you.
Thank you. I wanted to turn to space. We've got Starship and a lot of short-term decisions that have to be made about getting Starship to orbit. We also have the goal of getting to Mars, and there's a lot of challenges getting to Mars in terms of making the habitats, the ships, something that you can survive the challenges of the long trip, and what's life going to be like on the Martian surface, and how are you going to set it up? To what extent does Elon and SpaceX do they work on those longer term challenges? Or do they not put much effort into that now because they're really focused on, we just got to get this thing to orbit first?
You know, the first big surprise to me when I started attending meetings was a weekly meeting that he never wanted to miss or cancel called Mars Colonizer. And it was about not Raptor engines, not propulsion, but what's it going to be like when we're on Mars? How will the machines we build there interact with us? What will we wear? What's the governance structure about being on Mars. There were even videos when they did the first Optimus the robot about how Optimus would operate on Mars. I remember talking to Sam Teller back then. Sam was his chief of staff, as many of you know, and he just said, "This is amazing. You're sitting at this meeting nodding and thinking, this is normal," until you step back and say, they're talking about how you'll have self-governing colonies on the surface of Mars and how you'll not only be able to create the oxygen and the fuel you need, but what you're going to wear. And he hasn't done those meetings in the past 6 months or so, but every now and then he will go into a meeting and just, I'd say fantasize, but I'm not sure he thinks it's a fantasy, just figure out what life on Mars is going to be like for human civilization.
If I can just follow up on that, I have a friend who works for SpaceX on Crew Dragon, who told me they also work on starships. They work on human life support on Crew Dragon, and also there's already some work going into what is Starship going to be like in terms of human life support for those future missions. To what extent did you get exposed to how many people or what kind of teams are working on that future of making Starship livable and making the colony livable?
I don't think there's a big team working on it, but I do know there are designs for how 100 people can be transported in Starship. And what he really focuses on is not just creating the booster and the ship, but saying we're going to need 1,000 of these. We're going to need to churn them out once a month because we'll never get to Mars without a fleet of at least 1,000 starships. And so every time there's a change in the engine or a change in the heat shield or the grid fence, or even maybe we don't want to use the landing legs, we'll use the arms of the Mechazilla, the tower, to catch Starship when it comes back, because we're going to have to turn it around. It's going to have to land and then relaunch within a few hours. Those type of things are driving him not just to focus on making Starship work, but making Starship work at scale so that it can be regularly turned around and we can do, have 1,000 Starships that can launch and with the boosters that can launch and land and shoot another ship up as soon as possible. So that's what they're working on more than how you're going to govern the colony on Mars.
Thank you.
Let's do about 5 minutes more, if you don't mind.
That sounds perfect. Appreciate it so much. One more time. By the way, Walter, I'm seeing so many comments below of people that are pre-ordering the book.
Thank you, everybody, and we'll have parties, and I'll come thank you all in person.
There was a suggestion which I found rather interesting, which was potentially like you were just saying, hey, Elon might learn things. Is there maybe a world where post Elon reading the book, you do a Twitter space with him to discuss it?
Yeah, I mean, I sure hope so. He said so. First he has the process of the book. I think he'll like it, but I'm used to be it Henry Kissinger or others saying, "Oh, why did you put that in?" But he's more self-aware than anybody I've written about. He has a more ability to have things be flung at him. And the book is deeply fair. The book is incredibly honest and incredibly open. No anonymous sources in the book, no anonymous quotes. So you know where everything's coming from, whether it's Martin Eberhard, criticizing him, or John McNeil having mixed feelings about him, or, somebody like Gwen Shotwell being very praiseworthy. But we've talked about doing a Twitter Spaces afterwards, and I don't know. We'll see if you host it, I host it, or he hosts it.
Hey, if you need a host, I'm right here. But
do you think we'll get a good enough audience if we do a Twitter Spaces together?
Oh, I have a feeling if we did one with you and Elon post that book coming out, we'd get a pretty sizable audience. Probably about a small country on here.
One of the scenes in my book, which I think y'all will love, it hasn't been reported, is this past Christmas Eve when he's flying to Austin, Texas from Twitter headquarters with his cousins, James and Andrew. And he's really pissed off about the fact that they have a server farm in Sacramento in a building there, and they're going to charge a lot if, beginning this year. And he decides he's got to move those servers out. He turns the plane around. And on the Christmas Eve day, they go to Home Depot, about 6 of them, Steve Davis of the Boring Company, James and Andrew, and one other guy, and buy pliers. He borrows a pocket knife of one of his security people to pry open the tile floors, and they start cutting out the servers so they can be transported out of the Sacramento server center and end up being sent to Portland. Well, it's typical Musk to be intuitive, pushing for things, but also he kind of got it wrong. The reason I'm mentioning it is that that's when you start having real service problems for a few weeks at Twitter because they didn't have enough server capacities. You remember even during the Super Bowl, for example. So I think we have to wait until we have enough servers if Elon and I are going to do a Spaces together.
I believe that is the correct approach to it. All right, let's get in one more quick question here from Omar, and then if we have time for Farzad, we'll see, but I think we might have to wrap up from there. But huge thank you to the whole panel for everything. Omar?
So you've written so many great biographies. Are there any sort of common threads you see between all of your subjects, all amazing people, or any distinct differences?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, these aren't how-to books. So Benjamin Franklin is a totally different individual than Steve Jobs. Even though Franklin is very inventive and innovative, he loves please almost to a fault, insinuating. He loves to please the people in front of him. He loves finding compromise. So the book, there's at some point I'll probably do a book on leadership lessons, but the lessons from Elon are pretty distinctive. The only person like him was Steve Jobs. And those lessons are very clearly in the book, which include curiosity, a passion, a reality distortion field, a willingness to take risks, a sense of adventure. And you watch these grow from his childhood when he, learned how to confront pain and be energized by it, all the way to the snap close of Twitter. And it's not the same as Jennifer Doudna, who is the heroine of my book about gene editing. It's not the same as Ben Franklin, but there are some commonalities, especially with Steve Jobs. And I'll do one more since I think you said
Yeah, Farzad.
Awesome.
Farzad. He's one of the hosts here, so we got
I
to
appreciate you.
accommodate
Walter,
Farzad.
you're the best. You're the man. Thank you so much. It was actually kind of a piggyback on what Omar brought up. So one of the things that I, my wife and I talk about this often. It's from the sounds of it, Elon is somebody who's had you just described it. He had somewhat of a tough childhood with bullying and maybe a relationship with his father. And I was wondering, out of all the people that you studied and sort of piggybacking on Omar, how much is adversity like, is that a shared trait between all those great people that you've covered? Is that early on adversity a huge shaper into being able to dissect things as an adult and being able to be successful and having a high tolerance for pain? Did you observe that as a commonality between all these folks?
Yes. Every person I've written about, almost, with the exception of Jennifer Doudna, has felt like an outsider, a bit of a misfit in childhood, and felt a real sense of pain and adversity, whether it's Leonardo da Vinci growing up in the small village of Vinci and running away to Florence, where he's born out of wedlock, he's left-handed, he's gay, he's distracted. And that sense of being an outsider, which Einstein, I mean, you talk about rough childhoods, and Kissinger being Jewish in Germany in the early 1900s, and Kissinger being beaten up as a child, having to cross the street when non-Jewish kids were walking by him in Firth, Germany. For Elon, it was particularly exaggerated because the brutality of his childhood was exacerbated by the psychological brutality of his father. And in some ways, you'll see that as the theme of the book. Elon Musk is still very much with us. I talked to him many, many times, but that, Elon doesn't speak to his father now, but that adversity that comes from a father who's a bit of a fantasist and very psychologically tough on him also helped him. One of the things that biographers find is a commonality among very strong, successful men is that it's often about dad. It's often, as Barack Obama says in the beginning of his memoirs, I think every successful man is either trying to live up to his father or live down the sins of his father. And in Elon's case, it's both. In Einstein's case, it was both. In Leonardo's case, it was both. And Ben Franklin, a runaway from Philadelphia, who had been apprenticed by his father to his own brother. All of these things have a certain adversity. I grew up in New Orleans, the greatest town in the world where you can grow up. My parents, greatest, smartest people I've ever met. It means that I kind of had a happy childhood. It means I'll never be Elon Musk, but at least I'll be able to write about an Elon Musk.
Well, I'm glad we have you writing books,
Yeah, and
Walter.
Jobs was adopted as well.
What's that? Oh, Steve Jobs
Jobs and his
had
adoption,
two
yeah.
fathers to live up to. His biological father, if you've read the book, when he finally discovers who that is, and of course, his father who adopted him. So, but with Elon, you're going to be surprised at the adversity he faced as a child, what his friends, wives, everybody heard him late at night channeling some of the things that happened to him as a child and how that's affected him